Now, Stezzi Training and Consulting also works on maximizing employee performance. Do you do that through management? You do that with the employer, or you work with both?
Work with both. For example, a lot of the training that I do is in what you might call enabling skills. For example, lots of people know exactly how to do their jobs and they're very good at it, but they don't get everything done. So what they really need is a little help in the area of time management, how to organize activities, and again, there's great information available for time management that I get to use in my workshops, or it could be communication skills, conflict resolution, strategic planning skills. So whatever the gap is between what the employer is looking for in the employee as far as their expectations and what the actual performance is, that's where the training comes in to help fill that gap. But the leader has to pick up the slack after that too. It's one thing to get the training in a workshop, it's another thing to get the reinforcement afterwards from your boss when you get back to work.
I've heard at times that a compliment from a boss or office morale that is good is sometimes appreciated more than a raise. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that because I think most people today, I hope, realize that raises are not what they used to be. When I was new into the workplace, raises, I remember getting raises of 5, 10, 15%. I got a 25% raise one time, but that was also when we had double-digit inflation, and even those raises weren't catching up with things. I think the reality is everyone needs to be appreciated inside of work or outside of work, and it's sort of like a workplace equation in my mind. It goes something like this: when you work for an organization, again, you spend most of your waking hours there, so you deserve to be treated in a respectful manner. You deserve to be acknowledged and appreciated for what you're doing. The other side of the equation is this: when I work for your organization, you are paying my bills.
That's right.
And I think that we need to look at it from both points of view, that the employee should hold up their end of the bargain, and the leader has a big responsibility too. Also, your co-workers and your bosses are like your second family, aren't they? They're a very important part of your life. Except you spend more time with them, probably. Right. Right. That's very important to feel a part of something. You've sort of been saying that in a different way. Exactly. It could be like anything else, anything from nourishing to toxic and everywhere in between. And when you describe the bad boss, it's a toxic environment where I spend 8 to 10 hours of my day, 5 days a week, 4 weeks out of every month throughout the year after year. It's literally something that on the one hand is very challenging, but on the other hand, well, let me put it this way. I had a boss once where I had an issue with one of my employees. Their performance was not where it should be, and I was attributing it to a personality trait. And this person was more experienced than me and told me one of the most important things I needed to know. He said, "Bob, everything is related to personality. Whether you're a hard worker or not, whether you're careful or whether you're careless. And if you're not going to coach people on things that have to do with their personality, you're not going to help anyone to improve or to change." And the problem is, I said to him, "I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. You know, what you're really talking about is helping this person change habits and change their behavior." And he said, "No, you're not a psychologist or a psychiatrist." He said, "You spend a lot more time with that individual than anybody else does. You probably see them every day. You have more opportunities. Plus, the information in psychology is available to you." The truth of the matter is, leadership is psychology. And what I mean by psychology is straightforward and honest psychology. When people trust you, you can influence them to do almost anything in the workplace. On the other hand, when the trust level is low, one of the things, by the way, which causes this, and I had another manager tell me once, before I was working with his supervisors, he said, "Let me explain my leadership style to you." He said, "I don't bother my supervisors. I let them do their thing." I said, "Well, that sounds good." He says, "I only come to see them when there's a problem." So I didn't show any reaction. And he said, "What? What?" Well, I didn't say anything. He said, "No, well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you only see people when there's a problem." And he said, "Oh my gosh, I've become the Punisher." See, one of the things that, you know, even when you're not a bad boss per se, if you treat people with respect and you do acknowledge people once in a while, if you see them more often for things that are wrong than things that are right, the trust level gets lower and you can't influence them. It's no different than in personal life. That's one of the problems police have, where people say, "Gee, the only time I see them is when I get a parking ticket or a speeding ticket." Right? Well, see, I grew up in Philadelphia, and they were the smart beat cops that understood that very well. And what they did is they had, and they were honest and sincere. They were nice guys, nice gals. They talked to you. And because in the city, you were standing outside a lot of times, you know. And but if you saw that police officer and they usually treated you in a respectful way, maybe even joked around a little bit, first of all, you didn't want to do anything to disappoint them. On the other hand, if the person was a bully, you might want to take advantage of that person.
Now, Stezzi Training and Consulting works with companies on managing an organization in challenging times, and you might have a challenging time caused by an image problem, possibly a defective product, or as today so often we see companies downsizing because of economics. What do you do? How do you help people like this?
Well, you know, that's a good example, because there's a whole area that people sometimes are not aware of, and what we call it is workplace survivors. When you keep your job and other people have lost them, there's an array of emotions that people go through, and if you ignore them, it's just disaster. For example, one of the things that people feel is the pressure of the additional workload. You have 3 people doing the work that maybe 5 people used to do before. You also have lost friends that you've possibly worked with for years, and believe it or not, we call this workplace survivors, because just like surviving an actual disaster, you literally grieve those people that weren't there, and these emotions are very confusing if you're not aware of them. There are more, but what we can do is not just talk to the managers and supervisors about what to expect is going to happen when you're going through downsizing, but also to employees, giving them the skills that they need to cope. Well, here's the typical scenario. Hey, we have this great person, we'd like to groom them for management, they're a little rough around the edges. That usually means they have lacking social skills, they don't communicate very effectively. In other words, they understand operationally how to get the job done, but not how to deal with people in an effective manner. And that's where we can help them with coaching skills, communication skills. You know, the overall concepts of being an effective leader are actually fairly simple. Getting them done is another thing, and that's where the coaching comes in. It's one thing to raise your awareness in a workshop, but if it's really difficult for you to do those things, I mean, for example, I think if I gave anyone a test on time management, they'd probably do very well. Is what you should do: prioritize, have a to-do list, and so on. But getting people to do those things, and that's where the one-on-one coaching is very helpful. Using information, again, like Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence information, to get people to practice the behaviors that will benefit them in the workplace.
What about working with management in the same area?
Very similar, very similar. I guess, you know, we're talking about people that weren't born managers. I do have a lot of compassion for managers, though, not to defend them, but I was a manager for long enough to know that it's the hardest thing in the world. It really is difficult, and especially for the first line manager, the first line supervisor. If you think about it, the first line supervisor, no matter what line of work you're in, your people are doing the actual work for the organization, and yet you have the lowest level of authority in the whole management structure. And so that's where the challenge comes in, but it's also the opportunity, because people don't respond to position power, they respond to the person. And when we can help people to understand how to communicate their sincerity, clarity, and direction, and to try to diagnose what's going on when there's a problem instead of just holding people accountable immediately, it really helps both employees and managers to be more successful.
Now, with Stezzi Training Consulting over the years, and I don't know whether you can mention company names or not, and probably not, what are you most proud of in working with a company that you did to turn things around, to make things better?
Well, it's very exciting to work with an organization over time and see the people that you've worked with moving through the organization and even to other organizations. In a lot of cases, it's like, hey, Bob, you helped me out in this company, and now I'm over here, and why don't you come and see us, because I think you can help us out here too. So that's very satisfying, because in a classroom or in a coaching situation, you're not sure that things are actually happening, but you can't see them happening when you're working with an organization over a period of time.
What advice would you offer someone in today's challenging economy, both in management and as just regular employee, to keep their job?
Optimism. Optimism is one of the most important parts of our motivation in life, and I don't mean to make it sound more simple than it is, but it's a choice. In any given situation, you can focus on the things that you don't like and make it seem very miserable, and it will be. Or you can focus on the positive aspects. You can operate from strength. So in a word, I would say being optimistic, choosing to be optimistic. And by the way, it's we know now that even a pessimistic person can become an optimist simply by practicing being optimistic.
Well, also, too, negative people have a negative impact on employee morale, both with management and with your regular employees. Would you agree with that?
It's horribly contagious. Negative attitudes are very contagious. Again, some new discoveries in brain science and the way people interact with each other. I was very surprised to find that as contagious as negative attitudes are, positive attitudes are more contagious. And so when I say that the concepts are easy, but actually following through is another thing, you know, when you feel that you're knee-deep in gore, fighting the battle all day long at work, sometimes it's hard to remember, I think I need to have a more positive interaction with a few people here because things are very stressful at this particular point.
It's very funny you mentioned that. I happen to remember a situation where I worked with a woman for years and was a very positive person, and someone came in, nice guy who worked very closely with her, but he was Captain Negative. And she became a negative person, and it was like, oh my God, I hated seeing these people every day. Eventually, he left and moved on, and she returned to her normal self, and it was like two personality changes.
Well, yeah, you know, one thing that we do know about people is, you know, the two of us, for example, if they were to measure different physiological functions within our own bodies because we're communicating, because we have a rapport, that they actually become more similar. And so there is that it is literally contagious, the attitudes and the way we influence each other. That's the great opportunity, and that's what's so exciting about the type of work that I do, that we can actually improve our effectiveness with other people and be happier, not just more successful.